we look at some more unusual foam swords. This is the Kitsune clan, a group of sword enthusiasts who like cosplay, reenactment, and historical martial arts. If you have similar interests, feel welcomed. We have recently looked at foam swords for training Japanese martial arts, so katanas, and we have been looking at swords for training European martial arts, so European style weapons, also in foam, anime type foam especially, meaning a bit harder than the LARP swords. It was now a logical step for us to explore a bit further because there are also other sword types available on the market that can likewise be used. And we start out here with a Chinese type blade with a Jian, or at least it's Chinese inspired, because if we look at the exact construction of the handle and the hilt, we will find deviations from it. For example, the crossguard is relatively narrow, so it's not protruding as far as the Jian would usually have it, but it's more bulky and it has some protrusions towards the handle, which makes it tricky to grip right under the crossguard. Definitely a deviation, but it's manageable to use it. What's more annoying is the handle. The handle is also round, as we had it already with the European weapons, and usually a Jian should have a handle with an oval cross section, and also the handle is super thin. That makes it a bit annoying. On the other hand, it somehow works. The blade is a bit wider than it would be the case for a metal version of this sword, but you can still perform most of the actions that you would want with such a sword, although it becomes a bit more top heavy due to this more massive blade. And as you see here against a Dao, it can perform well. The movements are fine and nothing too much to complain with it. Happy to have a Chinese sword also available, not only European ones, not only Japanese ones, or only crazy fantasy swords. This sword is definitely usable and recognizable also as a Jian. Next up, something unusual, and I was really surprised to see something like this on the market, but I was hoping for it for a longer time. I call it here a rapier, but in principle this is somewhere between a rapier, a small sword. You get the idea. It's more of a fencing weapon and it's more of a stabby weapon. And they did a pretty good job here. The blade, so the foam blade, has a rather diamond-shaped cross-section as you would expect it from the real deal. And that makes this weapon behave quite good. Also for somebody used to train with metal. The weight distribution is much more towards the handle. The hand protection is a bit simple, but it's more elaborate than with other foam weapons. So I think it gives a good feel. And overall, the weapon moves astonishingly fast and precise. So this is fun to play with. I was expecting it to wobble quite a bit because a lot of the fantasy weapons or foam weapons have this type of wobble when they are softer, but this one is relatively sturdy. You also need to be a bit careful. I think if you poke somebody in the eye with it, this will be a problematic thing. So a certain degree of carefulness is definitely necessary, but it's still a soft weapon. It has some give to it, so you can definitely train without a lot of protective gear with it. If you are afraid of your eyes, you could, for example, use protective goggles for that. You can use different schools of fencing with it. The handle is a historical one. It's not a modern fencing handle, so you can do quite some stuff with it. It's a bit bulky. That's something that surprised me a bit. That's unusual because a lot of these fencing weapons usually have rather thin handles, and this handle is much bulkier than with some of the other foam weapons. Anyway, it feels good, it moves good, so this is a real cool addition to the set of foam weapons, and it can definitely expand our training range quite a bit, because usually the alternatives besides steel for fencing are not really given. So there's no real polypropylene solution for fencing weapons. So I really love this one, and I think this could become quite popular. Next up is something really, really special. and I'm so glad I found this one. This is from a strange computer game, and it looks really weird, and it reminds me of some of the constructions from Genshin Impact, where the handguard impedes the handle quite a bit. But of course, we can cut stuff away with a box cutter and fix things with duct tape. And then you would think, hey, this still looks like a fantasy sword, but there are some Indian swords that have this kind of blade shape, at least in principle. Here's one example from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Thank you guys for providing images with public domain license on the internet. This is really cool. If we look at the handle of this fantasy thing, it reminds of a Kanda handle, so it has a full hand protection, but you can still grab it with the left hand. Therefore, this feels really Indian, and therefore this is a good addition. Still, the blade is super heavy, and you can see it smashes other cosplay weapons. At least it bends them heavily. If you want to see how a smashed cosplay weapon in a free play looks like, I will link a video in the description box where one very heavy cosplay weapon shattered another one. The overall weight distribution of this thing feels like an axe sword, and we have talked about heavy swords in some other videos. I will also link these in the description box, and this definitely reminds to it, but as I've pointed out, there is a historical correlation to this, and so far I have to say Indian weapons are a rarity to get in foam. I have significantly more different types of Indian swords in polypropylene, and that's cool because you can train and compare then Indian weapons or Indo-Persian weapons with the European ones and the Far East Asian ones. And in foam, we don't have too much of this yet. So I'm really happy that this thing exists, although it's a bit dangerous for the other weapons we have available. Next up, again, something historical. When we talked about the historical European martial arts sword, we came across a Viking sword, and I already mentioned the Roman Spatha. This one here also reminds of a Spatha. If you look at the handle, it also reminds of a Gladius, but it's definitely too long for Gladius. The blade is very massive, as it would be with the historical originals, and in foam this can be a problem. You can see this when you swing this thing around. It wobbles a bit, and it wobbles at points where you would usually not expect it to wobble. That's because, as the original, this blade has not a lot of taper, only very much at the tip. The blade will taper to a narrow point, but most of the time the two edges run parallel, and that causes a lot of weight in the blade. The handle is a bit long, and you can see if you have smaller hands, you can grasp it with two hands. For me, it's mostly a one-handed weapon. The interesting thing now with this sword available, it has quite some mass, and you can make use of it and train especially for that. It's interesting to use that, for example, against the Viking sword, because they have both rather long blades, one-handed usually, and you can swing them quite a bit around, and historically they also had quite some overlap. Overall, it's, in my view, a very positive development that the market has expanded so much. I talked in one of the earlier videos about that Sword Art Online basically started this type of market, and now we have so much variation available, and a lot of these swords are really durable and they make fun, and so they are a good add-up not only for people that are interested in doing cosplay, but also that are interested in training weapon type martial arts. Hope we could inspire you. See you around next time.